Lee Majors was never the kind of man to show his feelings. He was the $6 million man. Tough, unstoppable, untouchable. But now at 85, he's made a confession no one expected, one that changes everything. For years, fans thought they knew his story. They believed the woman who held his heart was the same one who lit up the screen, the star whose poster hung on countless teenage bedroom walls. Their names were joined in headlines, red carpets, and tabloid gossip. Together, they were Hollywood's golden couple of the 1970s. But that wasn't the whole truth. In a rare moment of honesty, Lee opened up, not about the woman everyone assumed, but about someone else. Someone who had quietly stood in the background of his larger-than-life journey. Someone the cameras never saw. Someone who, for a brief time, made him feel more human than all the fame in the world ever could. Fans scrambled to understand. What emerged was a story deeper than any tabloid ever told. A story of ego, heartbreak, missed chances, and the one woman he let slip away. Who was she? And why had he stayed silent for so long? The truth behind Lee Majors' confession is more complicated and more emotional than anyone could imagine. Long before he became television's bionic hero, Lee Majors was just a boy from Kentucky with a painful past and no clear future. Born Harvey Lee Yeary in 1939, he never met his father, who died in a tragic work accident before Lee was born. Then, when Lee was only 16 months old, his mother was killed in a car crash. His life began with loss. Raised by distant relatives in Michigan, he never truly felt like he belonged. From a young age, Lee learned to hide his emotions and keep moving forward, a lesson that would follow him long after fame found him. He poured his energy into sports. Football became his escape, his way to prove himself and feel alive. He earned a scholarship to Indiana University, then transferred to Eastern Kentucky, where he became a standout athlete. But his dream of going pro ended suddenly when a severe back injury left him paralyzed for weeks, and his football future was gone in an instant. So, what does a man do when the one thing that defines him suddenly disappears? For Lee Majors, it meant starting over. He took a job with the Los Angeles Parks and Recreation Department, clearing brush and pouring concrete. It was honest, hard, blue-collar work, a far cry from fame. But fate had other plans. A friend suggested he try acting, almost as a joke. Lee gave it a shot, and Hollywood noticed. Behind that rugged jawline and movie star smile, though, was a man who'd been fighting to survive since childhood. Lee Majors was orphaned before he even knew what it meant to be loved. His father died in a work accident before he was born. His mother was struck by a car when he was barely a year old. After that, he was passed from one relative to another, never truly belonging, never learning how to let anyone in. He learned early that the world doesn't wait for the broken, so he made himself unbreakable. He became the strong one, the man who never cried, never asked for help, and never showed weakness. Ironically, those very qualities, born out of pain, became his trademark in Hollywood. As the world fell in love with his on-screen heroes, Lee was still trying to figure out who he really was. He studied acting under Estelle Harmon and soon landed his first big role, playing Barbara Stanwyck's son in The Big Valley. With his chiseled looks and quiet intensity, he wasn't just another pretty face. He had presence. Audiences adored him. But behind the scenes, Lee carried the weight of every loss he'd endured. The truth is, Lee Majors never chased fame because he wanted attention. He chased it because he wanted to be seen, really seen, for the first time in his life. And the higher his star rose, the more that emptiness followed. By the early 1970s, Lee Majors was no longer just a TV actor. He was a phenomenon. As the $6 million man, he became a symbol of strength, stoicism, and that cool, composed masculinity America admired. But with fame came scrutiny, and soon, the tabloids weren't just obsessed with his career. They were obsessed with his love life. That's when she entered the picture. Farrah Fawcett was everything the era idolized. Radiant, carefree, impossibly beautiful. When she and Lee began dating in 1969, the media went wild. He was television's golden boy. She was a rising model and actress. Together, they looked like a dream come to life. Red carpets, magazine covers, interviews. Everywhere they went, they were the picture of perfection. Lee and Farrah became the face of glamorous, untouchable Hollywood. But behind the flashbulbs, the reality was far more complicated. Lee was private, guarded, and, by many accounts, deeply insecure about the attention Farrah received, especially from other men. As her fame skyrocketed with Charlie's Angels, the balance between them shifted. Suddenly, she was the bigger star, and that hit Lee harder than anyone realized. He had built his identity on control, on being the protector, the rock. But now he was losing his grip not just on the narrative, but on her. Farrah's schedule was packed. Her face was everywhere. The couple spent more and more time apart. Rumors of jealousy, distance, and arguments began to swirl. Still, Lee said nothing. No public fights, no tabloid scandals, just a quiet, growing tension behind his stoic expression. To the world, they were still the perfect couple. But privately, everything was falling apart. By 1979, the illusion shattered. After more than a decade together, and 6 years of marriage, Farrah Fawcett walked away from Lee Majors. It wasn't just a breakup. It was a headline-grabbing implosion that left Lee Majors completely blindsided. What hurt most wasn't that she left. It was how she left, and who she left him for. While Lee was working long hours on set, Farrah had reportedly grown close to actor Ryan O'Neal, a man Lee had once called a friend. Not long after she moved out of their Beverly Hills home, the cameras caught her with Ryan. The whispers became confirmation. The betrayal was public. Lee had spent years trying to hold their relationship together, fighting against distance, fame, and the weight of 2 careers constantly pulling them apart. But now, it was over, and the whole world was watching. For a man who had survived childhood abandonment and rebuilt himself from nothing, the pain cut deeper than anyone could see. He had built his identity on being the strong one, the provider, the protector, the man who never cracked. But now, the one person he thought truly knew him was gone, and with someone else. He never lashed out publicly, never gave the tabloids the story they were chasing. But behind closed doors, friends said Lee was shattered. He withdrew from the spotlight, stopped showing up at events, turned down interviews, and quietly disappeared from the world that had once adored him. For years, people assumed he was simply heartbroken, that Farrah had broken his heart. But that was only part of the story. What few knew was that Lee wasn't just mourning a failed marriage. He was mourning what he had lost in himself along the way. Real connection, vulnerability, the chance to be truly seen. Because while the world believed Farrah Fawcett was the love of his life, Lee knew something different. She wasn't. And losing her forced him to face a truth he had long buried, that once, long before the fame and the headlines, he had met someone else. Someone who made him feel something real, and he had let her slip away. While tabloids obsessed over Farrah and Ryan, and fans dissected what went wrong, Lee Majors vanished. No red carpets, no late-night interviews, no new roles. He retreated into quiet, trying to rebuild a life away from the cameras. It was during that stillness that he met someone very different. She wasn't a rising starlet or a socialite. She didn't chase fame, and she didn't care about his. In fact, few people even remember her name, and maybe that's exactly what made her matter. They met while Lee was working behind the scenes, taking time off to focus on himself. She was soft-spoken, intelligent, grounded, and completely uninterested in Hollywood's noise. She saw him not as a celebrity, but as a man who had been hurt and had never fully healed. Friends later said it was the first time they'd seen him truly laugh in years. She brought out a side of him that fame had buried. A gentleness, a peace, a quiet joy. With her, there were no cameras, no scripts, no expectations. Just long walks, quiet talks, and an ease he hadn't known since childhood. But the relationship never became public. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't built for the spotlight. And maybe that's why it didn't last. Still scarred from his breakup with Farrah, Lee couldn't bring himself to fully open up. Vulnerability felt dangerous, a risk he couldn't afford to take again. So instead of leaning into this rare, real connection, he pulled back. And just like that, she was gone, slipping out of his life before most people even knew she'd been in it. Her name faded from memory. But for Lee, the mark she left never did. She never gave interviews. There were no photos, no tell-all stories. Just a brief, quiet chapter tucked away in the shadows of his long, complicated life. But for Lee Majors, she left a mark no one else ever could. Decades later, when the cameras were long gone, he finally admitted that he had never stopped thinking about her. For most of his career, Lee Majors played men who never cracked under pressure, strong, steady, unshakable. But the truth was, Lee carried more fear than anyone realized. And none of it had to do with fame. It had everything to do with love. That woman, so unlike the spotlight chasers who surrounded him, had offered something rare, quiet intimacy. A space where he could simply be, without judgment or expectation. But for a man who had spent a lifetime building emotional armor, that kind of closeness was terrifying. He had lost both parents before he was old enough to remember them. He'd been passed between relatives, learning early that people leave, that love is fleeting, and that getting too close always hurts. Even after he became a television icon, that fear never faded. It only grew louder with every relationship that fell apart. So when love appeared again, raw, real, and unfiltered, Lee did what he'd been conditioned to do. He pushed it away. There was no fight, no scandal, no betrayal. Just silence. Fewer calls, missed dinners, a slow retreat built from 1,000 small excuses. And by the time he realized what he was doing, it was too late. She was gone. What he felt wasn't the heartbreak of betrayal. It was the ache of knowing he had destroyed something beautiful with his own hands. Years later, in a rare moment of honesty, he confided to a friend, "She never asked me to be anyone but myself, and I didn't know how to do that." It wasn't about fame or headlines. It was about a man who found peace and ran from it. Lee would marry again, several times. Some relationships lasted, others didn't. But none, according to those who knew him best, ever touched him the same way. Because that woman hadn't just offered him love. She had offered him freedom. And he never forgave himself for walking away from it. Even after she was gone, he couldn't bring himself to talk about it. Not to the press, not to friends, and not even to himself. Outwardly, life went on. He took new roles, attended charity events, and kept up the image of the composed, confident man the world expected. But inside, he was haunted, because the woman he had pushed away had awakened something deep within him, a longing for something real, something that no amount of fame or fortune could replace. And now that he'd tasted it, only to lose it, everything else felt hollow by comparison. He dated again, married again, but even his closest friends noticed the change. He was kind, generous, even charming, but always a little distant. There was a part of him no one could reach, a quiet space he never let anyone into. The truth was, he was still replaying that one chapter, wondering if there had been a moment, just one, when he could have changed everything. A phone call he didn't make, a door he didn't knock on, words he never found the courage to say, but he never did. And with time, that silence only grew heavier. Professionally, he stayed successful. The Fall Guy gave him another hit, and for a while it looked like he'd bounced back. But when the lights went down and the camera stopped rolling, the regret always crept back in, quiet, constant, and permanent. The years slipped by, 60, 70. He watched friends pass away, watched Hollywood change, watched entire eras fade into history, and through it all, no one ever knew. Because the love of Lee Majors' life wasn't a movie star. She had never graced magazine covers. She had never chased him. She had simply waited, offered him her heart, and he had walked away. For years, Lee Majors stayed silent. He gave interviews now and then, always polite, always professional. He spoke fondly of his past work, shared a few safe stories about the golden days, and gave fans exactly what they expected. But beneath that calm exterior lay a truth he'd kept buried for decades. At 85 years old, something shifted. Maybe it was age, maybe it was reflection, or maybe, after all this time, he had finally made peace with the truth. During a sit-down interview for a career retrospective, Lee was asked a simple question. Looking back, do you have any regrets? He paused, smiled faintly, and then said something no one expected. I let the love of my life walk away. The room fell silent. He didn't name names. He didn't have to. The interviewer, assuming he meant Farrah Fawcett, pressed gently. You mean your first wife? Lee shook his head. No, not her. Someone else. Someone the world never knew about. She was quiet, kind, and she saw right through me. He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting off camera as though lost in a memory he'd kept locked away for half a lifetime. I wasn't ready, he said softly. I thought I was. But I was still trying to be invincible. You can't love someone properly when you're trying to protect yourself from being seen. That was all he said. No name, no timeline, just those words. But they were enough to spark a storm of speculation. Fans flooded forums. Articles appeared overnight. Social media buzzed with questions. Who was the mystery woman? Was she from the industry? A lost connection from another life? No one knew for sure, and maybe that was the point. Lee Majors had spent a lifetime playing men who kept secrets. But this time, the secret was real and deeply human. Because sometimes the most powerful love stories aren't the ones splashed across magazine covers. They're the quiet ones that live in the shadows, unspoken, unresolved, unforgettable. In the end, Lee Majors became something few Hollywood legends ever do. A man whose greatest role wasn't performed on screen, but lived in silence. While the world celebrated his fame, his career, and his iconic image as the $6 million man, the real story was far more intimate. It wasn't about stunts or strength or fame. It was about a man who carried a memory for nearly half a century, a love he never stopped feeling, and never once betrayed by speaking aloud, even in his final years. As tributes poured in and retrospectives aired, Lee never revealed her name. He never pointed to a photograph or shared a letter. It was as if he was still protecting her, guarding the one thing in his life that had remained untouched by fame, gossip, or time. And maybe that's why it mattered so much to him, because that kind of love, private, unspoken, unresolved, carries its own weight. It shapes you. It follows you. It becomes the lens through which every other love is measured. Those closest to Lee said he sometimes grew quiet when the topic of love came up. He'd smile softly, lost in a memory but never elaborate. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something deeper, closer to reverence. One friend once asked if he had any regrets. Lee didn't hesitate. I had one chance to be truly known, he said, and I let it slip through my fingers. And maybe that's what makes his story resonate now more than ever, because behind every legend is a human being, and behind Lee Majors, the action hero, the heartthrob, the Hollywood icon, was a man who once loved in a way that changed him forever. He just wasn't ready. Not then, but even after all the fame, all the years, and all the loss, he never forgot her. And now, at 85, the world finally knows.